Hello, this is Rachael with Karefree Krafting. I'm back today with a new technique. I'm going to demonstrate foundation paper piecing. This is a very easy technique. When you first learn it, it feels like you're doing everything upside down and backwards. And then after you do 2 or 3 pieces, it's the easiest thing in the world. I've got this pattern. I'm not demonstrating this pattern, but the technique I'm going to show you can be used to make a pattern like this. This is Elephant Abstractions by Violet Craft. The block I'm going to make today is just a generic elephant block that I printed off of Electric Quilt. But it's the same technique. What we'll need is we'll need some scissors, seam ripper, rotary cutter and mat, and then add a quarter roller. Some of these add a quarter rollers have a really thin side. That's called an add a quarter plus. And you can use that to fold the paper. If you don't have an add a quarter plus, you just have a plain add a quarter, then you will need a piece of cardboard or a postcard or something like that. Not corrugated cardboard, something like a cereal box or a file folder. The fabrics I've picked, it feels like a good palette for late spring, early summer. Blue elephant on a yellow background with an orange ear. So the first thing we're going to do is use our paper scissors, and we're going to cut this out. And we're not going to cut on the line, we're just going to rough cut around it, because this will all be trimmed down later. So now we have all of our pieces, and if this was a bigger block, there would be a map or something, but you don't really need anything on a block like this. It's going to go together like that. I know it looks like it doesn't fit, but once you put everything together, you take off the seam allowances, it fits. So let's start simple. E, that's blue, so it's going to be part of the elephant. We'll cut it out in blue. And D, well, that's going to be background, so we'll cut that out in yellow. We have several options for how we can secure piece E to the fabric. We can pin it. We can use a glue stick. I'm going to use a tape runner. So then we'll just place piece E on the fabric. And the nice thing about the tape runner is that the tape always sticks to the paper. So if you place piece E like I just did and decide that you don't like where it is or you're wasting too much fabric, you can reposition it. So piece E is done. Piece D is going to be this yellow background fabric, so we'll do the same thing that we did with piece E. There we are, so there's piece D. Now 2 of our pieces are done. So now we'll do piece A. And we'll go in the order. I don't know if you can see this, but there is an A1, A2, A3, A4 printed on here. So A1 is going to be the blue and A3. A2 and A4 are going to be the yellow. So here's where our add a quarter roller comes in. I'm going to use the 6-inch ruler for this because it's kind of a smaller project. The 12-inch is the most versatile. You can use the 12-inch on a very large project or a very small one. The 6-inch gets clumsy on a large project. The 12-inch gets a little clumsy on a small project. I believe they come in 18-inch, but I don't have one. I haven't felt the lack. We're going to use this to fold on all of our lines. We want a real sharp crease along the line. And if you notice, when we fold the line between A1 and A2, it comes up through A3 and A4. That's okay. That doesn't matter. Just want a nice sharp crease. And then the line between A3 and A4, and then A1 and A2. So the next thing we'll do is we'll get our fabrics cut. So we want a piece big enough for A1. and 1/4 inch all around, and it's actually easier for 1/2 inch. So A1 is about this long. We'll just cut the piece a little bit oversized. A lot of people think that you waste a lot of fabric with the foundation paper piecing. Well, you can, but usually you don't, because you make fewer mistakes and you have to pick out fewer seams because your creases are all really, really sharp. So then we have this A3 is a triangular piece, so we'll just fold it on, we'll just lay it on there. So I've got a pretty good margin there. And then I'll fold this back. I'll take my rotary cutter and I'll echo that line, but I'm way outside of it. I'm going to end up with a 1/4 inch seam there, and I'll cut about 1/2 inch of fabric. So there's our piece A3 and A1. Now we've got to cut A2, so we'll just lay it on there. You can cut this with scissors or with the rotary cutter. I'm showing you both ways today, and you pick whatever is easiest on you. Alright, and so the last piece we need is A4, and it's kind of triangular. So we'll lay that on there. So we're good on these two edges, and then we'll just fold over. We have A4, A3, A2, and A1. Not to be confused with the steak sauce. So the first thing we'll do is we can either, you know what, I taped the last one, I'll pin this one. I'll show you how to do it with pins. So we will put the back side of the fabric to the back side of the paper, and it's got to cover up A1. Some people use a light board for this. I've never had a light board because I'm very limited on space, and to be honest, I don't know where I'd store it. So we have the fabric. We have the fabric pinned to the back of the template piece. Again, the wrong side of the fabric to the wrong side of the template. I am going to use the flashlight on my cell phone to illuminate this. I'm hoping this comes through. I can see that I have a good 1/2 inch outside of the borders for A1, and that the fabric goes all the way to the edge. So now I will fold on this line between A1 and A2, and the add 1/4 ruler has this lip that's a 1/4 inch wide. So you lay this ruler like that, and that lip on the ruler needs to butt up against the paper, and then you trim off the excess. You have some confetti. So now you take piece A2 and you line up the cut edges. And you pin it. Now this is pretty stable. You can move it over to the sewing machine. We're going to trim all our threads. Trim your threads as you go, or you end up with a big mess. Now we'll take this and fold it open, just like that. You can press this down with your finger, just like I just did, or you can use a seam roller if you wear false nails or you have a really nice manicure or something. I usually don't. Okay, so the next thing we'll do, the next piece that goes on is A3. So we'll fold this on the line between A1 and A2 and A3, and then we'll trim here. We'll put our ruler on and butt the lip of that ruler up to the paper, and then we'll trim that off. More confetti. We can have a party. So here's piece A3, and here's section A3, here's piece A3. And if you lay it down, you want it to end up like something like this. So we will match the cut edges, and then flip it back to the front of the template and fold it down. Make sure your cut edges match, and then hold this up to the light, and you won't be able to see it because of shadows, but you hold this up to the light and you make sure that if this, here's my edge to A3, and my A3 fabric goes all the way out here. So we have a good border. It goes all the way to the edge of the template, and then we have at least 1/4 inch for the seam allowance. So then back at the sewing machine, where again we're going to sew on this line between the sections we've already got on there and the section we're putting on. And if you look at the back side, you can see the seam that you're sewing. So again, we can press this with our fingers, or we can use the seam roller. Then we're going to flip this over so the template is up, and fold back the paper and trim using our 1/4 roller. Now looking over here, we know that we want this piece to fit like that. So we're going to line it up with this cut edge. Then we'll flip this over so our cut edges are lined up, and on this piece it's easy to see that we'll have good coverage with this piece of the template. Press this any way we like. Some people even use an iron. Now we need to trim this down. On most patterns you will have a solid line, those are our sew lines, and then a dotted line, that's a cut line. So we're going to trim around this on the cut line. Our next section is C. So we will take our 1/4 ruler or our cardstock, and we'll make sure that we get a real crisp crease on that line. And this is going to be a piece of background and a piece of blue. We end up with this. So then on the back we open the fabric out and press it. And now C1 and C2 are both on there. So we will again trim on this dotted line and get the excess off. So all that remains is piece B. Now I want to say that you will sometimes find mistakes in a pattern, because I don't know if you can see this, but in piece B they've labeled to start up in this corner. This is B1, B2, 3, and 4. I'm going to put B2 on there and then put these little pieces. And sometimes there's a reason that you would have a funny order like that. You'll have to consult your pattern. Sometimes it's a mistake, so use your best judgment. So these pieces are small. B1, or I'm sorry, this is B1. B2, B3, and B4 are small. The piece that you have to cut off to cover that looks enormous, because if this is only, you know, for example right here, that's only about 1/4 inch wide. So once we add a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we've doubled the size of that piece. So the smaller pieces always look funny. Try not to second guess yourself too much. You're probably doing it right if they look like they don't fit. I've got a piece that's roughly the shape of B3. I've got good coverage. And then I've got a piece that's roughly the shape of B2 and B4. So we will use our tape to place B1 in the middle. B2 is going to need to end up like that. So we put the wrong side of the fabric to the wrong side of the template, wrong side of the fabric to the wrong side of the template, and so the fabrics are right sides together. And then we fold this piece down and make sure that we have good coverage, and we don't. It's sticking out on the corner, so I need to move this up a little bit. Now we have good coverage. So now B3 is a solid, so we just have to make sure that we have good coverage. Either way is the right way. So let's place that piece and fold our template down. So I just checked in the light, and we do have good coverage here. So we are going to sew on this line between B2 and B3. Okay, so our final piece is B4. We're going to fold that down the same as we have been. And we're going to trim it. And then we will put on our fabric. So again, we want the fabric up here, and we'll trim this. It will look right after it's trimmed. So we're going to put the fabric right sides together, and we will sew on this line between B1 and B4. So now the last thing we can do before we put all these together is we have to trim every block on the dotted line. The first two we've already done, but we've already trimmed A and C, so we need to trim B, and then we need to trim D and E. Watch your fingers. I have caught myself before. It's not fun. So now bringing D and D back in, you can see that we need to do some more trimming. We just need to cut them down to size. Again, watch your fingers. You can use a ruler for this if you need to. Alright, so now we have all of our pieces done. In most patterns, in fact in all the patterns I've dealt with, your letters and numbers are right side up. So for example, here's A, then B goes there, and C goes there. But C's upside down, so that's not right. The numbers and letters are upside down. So when in doubt, even if it fits, if the numbers are upside down or sideways, it's probably not correct. So now you look at your pieces and you see what needs to go together first. So the first things we need to put together are B and C. So I've got I've got B and C together, B and C with E next. So you take a pin and put it through the corner of one piece, and then you use the pin to line it up with the corner on the piece you're stitching it to. Then I will take a pin and do the same thing on the other end. And now your corners are lined up, and you just line up your seams. You can put a clip on it. If you're unsure, you can test your seams with another pin. Just stick a pin through the sew line, and it should come out the sew line on the other side. This is good. I'm satisfied with it. So let's take it to the sewing machine. So there's those pieces together, and you see how this is starting to fit a little bit better now that we're taking out the seam allowances. The next thing we're going to do is put piece D on top of this 3-piece unit. Piece A goes on last. So there's getting to be quite a few seams. It doesn't matter which way you press them. You press them however makes it lay flat. These pieces are pretty small, but if I had to line up this piece with something on A, or this intersection with something on E, then I would use a pin at that spot as well. You use pins anywhere that something needs to critically line up. With this little block, it's just in the corners. If you do the elephant pattern that I showed you at the beginning, the violet craft pattern, you will end up with a lot of sections to match up and some pretty long seams. And so pins and clips will keep you nice and organized. But we'll just do like we have been. We will use a pin to align these corners. There's the corner on piece C and the bottom corner on piece A. And again, everything's right side up. It's not upside down or sideways, although it will feel like you're working upside down and sideways initially. I promise you'll get used to it. This seems like a very complicated technique when you're watching someone else do it. But once you make a few of them, it's fairly simple, and it's easy to get very exact points with this technique. So then we'll just put some clips on it. And we will sew along this line here. That's our sew line. So there's all of our pieces together. See, I told you they'd fit together once we took off the seam allowances. And when we flip it, we have a blue elephant with an orange ear on a yellow background. And that's a nice, fun, late spring, early summer pattern. You might wait on this step if you're going to join a bunch of these together, or you might pull them off as you go, completely up to you. But the final step on any foundation piece pattern is that you have to pull the papers off. So just start where it's easy. This is why we set our stitch length so short, because it perforates the paper and it makes it easier to get the paper off without pulling the stitches out. And the rule I learned, you want the stitches just wide enough to get the seam ripper in if you have to reposition anything. If your stitches are any longer than that, then you risk pulling your stitches out when you start tearing the paper, and you can bend this paper a few times. It's already perforated, so if you just bend it a few times, it comes right off. In fact, you'll have trouble getting it to stay together. But you can pull the paper in the middle first. You can pull the paper in your seam allowance first. So there's our block. It puckers a little bit when you tear the papers off. Just once we press this, it'll be just fine. We could even go over it again with the seam roller. Press everything back down. You can steam press this. You can do whatever you want. It's your quilt. One thing I forgot to mention is the paper I use. You can get special paper for foundation paper piecing. I've never used it. I don't know if it's any good. I've always just used regular printer paper. That is the cheapest paper I can get from Walmart or Office Depot or Staples or wherever I happen to be when I need printer paper. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.